Today we're going to be taking a look at comparing one 180mm fan versus two 120s versus basically 1.5. It's really 2 in the test, but 1.5 because of the size of my testing apparatus, 140mm fans, and we're going to be comparing that directly against how one of each 120 and 140mm fan do it, or compare. Let's get right into it. Welcome to Computer Tech and More. Let's check out the data. So first up, we're going to be taking, well, all these are going to be using the case simulation test because that's how these larger diameter fans and stacking multiple fans on top of each other generally go inside computer cases. So first up, we have the X2-GP18. It is one of the feature fans in the Fractal design torrent case. It is one of the 280mm class fans. We have data points for the 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% PWM fan signals, and you can see that's a very flat line. And this is the kind of slope, really, that you want to see in a computer fan. You don't want to see very much airspeed drop between the front of the case and the back of the case, wherever that CPU air cooler is. So that's what these data points at the bottom are. The 6, the 9, the 11, and the 14.5 inch mark are the estimated position of your CPU socket. So the rough position of your air cooler inside of small form factor that still use air coolers, front to back airflow, compact towers, where they basically would fit a GPU the length of an standard ATX motherboard. The 11-inch mark, which would be your standard mid-tower type cases, and your 14.5-inch mark, which would be your large towers. Now, a bigger fan tends to have an easier time at filling the volume, so there's very little airspeed drop from the front of the case to the back of the case, assuming that you're in a large case. Smaller diameter fans tend to have a little bit harder time. We're going to get into that in a second. So this equates similarly to volumetric flow rate. So in the case simulation test, to do a volumetric flow rate, I would need to take several additional measurements. So that's not what this is testing. It's just airspeed and the airspeed drop. Volumetric flow rate, I would need to measure at least 3 locations inside the testing apparatus for the case simulation test to get a volumetric flow rate. But I didn't do it that way. If there's enough interest in it, maybe I can start doing that in the future. Please leave it in the comment section down below. Let's move on to the next little bit in the So first, we're going to just focus in on the X2GP18 because that's the feature fan of this test, and then everything else I just kind of added on to it because it made a lot of sense to me. We have my control fan, which is this teal line, and we have the X2GP18 as the purple line. You can see that, okay, sorry, I forgot. The control fan is based off of the A12X25, 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14, 140mm class fan. So blending the two fans together, I created a pseudo 130mm class fan. Basically, it's something for other fans to basically beat in terms of overall performance. So as you can see from the testing, in short throw distances, so in ultra compact cases, or if you're blowing air up from the bottom of the case up to your GPU, really the smaller fan is more effective than the larger diameter one. When you hit the 9-inch mark in a compact case, they're about equal, and then as you get to larger and larger cases, just the smaller diameter fan just doesn't have the same sort of staying power as a larger diameter one. So this leads me to a different point. If at all possible inside your computer case, if you can fit a larger fan, do so, but there is a limit to how big the fan can be. You don't want any restrictions in front of the fan. Back up to my picture. You don't want anything to block off any part of the blade. Otherwise, you're going to be reducing that airflow. So if the maximum size you can fit is 140 without blocking off any of the fan blade area, then that's the size to go with. Next, we're taking a look at the fans at 100% PWM fan signal. We got the teal line as the control, estimated RPM and noise level versus the X2GP18 and its RPM and noise level. So this is the disadvantage with larger fans. They're going to be noisier at lower RPMs simply because the tip speed, so that's the speed of the tip at the end, is going to actually be pretty fast even though the RPM may be slower. It's just like geometry physics. Anyways, we see the same sort of flow pattern. The X2GP18 is actually outperforming at all distances, but it's at a little bit higher noise level. Let's move on. All right, now this is the good stuff. This is where I started comparing all the different fan setups that I talked about. We got one A12X25, one CF-V12HP, a Cougar fan, one X2-GP14, one X2-GP18, two Cougar fans, two A12X25s, and two X2-GP14s. The X2-GP14 is one of the fans in the torn PC case that sits along the bottom row. So it's pretty obvious from the data, I'm going to talk on in a second, that more fans, of course, equals more better. But that wasn't the point of this test. It was actually to compare 180 fan being better than 240s or 220s. And will there be a difference in airflow when we fill the case with air? So again, this is trying to fill that volume, the whole volume of the computer case with air, comparing it to just having one fan in it. And how does that sort of relate to each other? And with regard to just having one larger fan as a comparative point. Also, does the quality of the fan really matter at this point? That was another key factor. So the S2 or the CF V12HP, right here, this orange line, is clearly a lower quality fan than the A12X25 right here in this brown line. So does the quality of the fan that you're putting in your computer case really matter? Or just having it full of having all these fans in it just completely counteract having poor quality fans because you're already just filling the volume with all this air. So that was the other point of this test. With regard to that, just look at the results for the A12X25 in particular in this test. It is the whitish line. Just look at how effective it is. It is completely blowing away all the other fans. So it is an additive effect. Even though for the single test, I used one of the brown ones I have. For the double test, I used two of the black ones that came off of my CPU or cooler. So a little bit of quality difference there. But it still drives home the point. Higher quality fans does improve how slowly the airspeed drop is from the front of the case to the back of the case. Now let's take a close look. I briefly went over it while I was talking there. So we got the single A12X25 having its pretty steep drop off. The orange line is the Cougar, the CF V12HP being right closer to the bottom of this test. Then we have the X2GP14, a little bit better than this. It has a bit better staying power, but it drops off pretty steeply towards the end. Then, basically from worst to best, I'm going to say two CF V12HPs. So it drops off steeply, and then it kind of gained performance. I think there was a little bit of a problem, or it just finally filled the volume and allowed for better readings. This is why I want better equipment. But it basically just leveled off, is what happened. So it didn't lose any more performance after the 11-inch mark. So that's actually a pretty good result. And it shows why having more fans does fill the volume and maintain a higher airspeed front to back. So it allows for better cooling of your computer case. So if you're on a budget and you're in a computer case and you're like, well, I can get one really nice fan or three crappy fans. Well, getting three crappy fans in terms of your overall cooling, if you're going air cooling, will be better than having just one high quality fan. Anything kind of in between is harder to balance. I would say, well, let's continue because I'm going to get sidetracked. I get sidetracked pretty easily when I get a little bit excited. So next, it's sort of a almost tie between one X2GP18, so that's a 180 millimeter fan, the purple line, and two X2GP14s, this darker green line. I hope it shows up well in the recording. I'm tracing it with the mouse cursor right now. On my screen that I'm looking at looks different enough than the single fan by itself. So having 240s is better than anything else. And this isn't quite apples to apples because I didn't equalize airspeed at a specific point, but it is a noise normalized value. So the point isn't being like, hey, as we move up the better fans, some 120s are better than 140s in all circumstances. It was just trying to compare it against 180, showing filling the volume is better. So, but the two X2-GP18s are roughly equal to the 180 millimeter class fan. Mine, there's a little bit of a dip, but they end up at about the same point, which amazingly is about the same point as the 220 millimeter Cougar fans. And then as we continue moving up the stack, we have the A12X25. Now it starts off peaking higher. Again, I addressed this with different fans. It also could be the way the fans interact with each other at the 6-inch mark, just causes a little bit of reduction in performance. But as we move further along to the 11 and 14.5-inch mark, the high quality A12X25 just blows the other fans away. So, I mean, that's how much are A12X25s right now? Like, are they still $30? So that's $3, $6, $9. $90 in fans to have the absolute best in air performance. And that's an extra half a meter per second. So at some point it is up to you to decide how much you want to spend on this. Let's move up to 100% PWM fan signal, see how things shape up, because we may see some additional results. So first up, we have the two Cougar fans, the orange and the yellow. And you see that their flow patterns are very similar, except once we start getting into finally larger cases. The two fans levels out and just beats out the single fan by itself. That makes a lot of sense. As we look over here, so again, the yellow and the orange line. So the yellow is 2 decibels noisier for substantially better airflow at a bigger case. So yeah, again, this isn't volumetric flow rate. To calculate volumetric flow rate, I would need to take additional measurements, but it can be estimated based on these values that more fans obviously is going to have a higher volumetric flow rate because you're putting more air through it. But air speed going past your heat generating components is what cools them, not the volumetric flow rate. So the two factors matter for different things. Next, we have, well, ironically, the two A12X25 spinning out 2,100 RPM and 22.9 decibels. The one by itself does spike higher once again. Again, I'm not sure why the two black ones I had from my knock to a cooler weren't pushing quite as much air at the shorter distances, but this is the measurement that my anemometer got, and I tested a whole bunch of times. But the tricky thing with doing the multi-fan testing, as we will see from the noise test, how everything is placed, is that the microphone is, or the anemometer is placed kind of in the middle between the two fans, so it just might be a semi-dead zone with a lower airspeed right there. Anywho, we do see that as the case gets bigger, it's basically a flat line, once again. So again, it's showing high quality fans really do make a difference there. Then we have already talked about the A12X single. It drops off pretty steadily, and one fan maintains the same airspeed as two Cougar fans. Again, not the same volumetric flow rate, but airspeed. So if you put the one fan by itself and had it blow directly past your CPU or cooler, it would be almost as effective as the Cougar fans in terms of the airspeed to it, but you wouldn't have the same amount of volume of air traveling through your case. So in reality, it wouldn't be quite as effective in total cooling. CPU by itself or total cooling. Sorry, it's kind of funny. Then we have the X2-GP18 and the two X2-GP18s. Again, you can see that they follow very similar trends until you hit the larger cases, 14.5 inches. That separates the two fans in terms of maintaining an airspeed. So it filled the volume of air inside the case, so that it essentially had no more room for it to slow down. So it allows it to be more effective. And then we have the X2GP18 being in the absolute best position. So one big fan by itself at this point at higher RPMs is better. And we do see the noise level off to the side, where the two A12 X2-5s are a couple about 3 decibels noisier than one. Did I talk about the Cougar? Yeah, about 2 decibels. How about the two Fractal 14 or 140 millimeter ones? Yeah, about 2 decibels. So you're gaining, you would think that they would add, but they don't. Adding more fans does not double the noise value. In my testing, it added 2 decibels to the total noise value, despite having twice as many noise generating components. So it is up to you to decide what is the best course of action for how you want to lay out these fans. Whether one big one is better or a couple smaller ones. So before we move on to the noise, that's the next one, I want to talk about one thing. So the quality and quantity of the fans does matter, but it is up to you to determine how important that is and how much you are willing to spend to get there. So like we saw with the A12 X2-5, it crushes most of the other fans, but it loses out once you're up against a larger, even larger diameter fan. And most fans don't have the same sort of quality of the A12 X2-5 in my testing so far. They tend to drop off much more steeply. So I would say on average, 120 versus 140, get the 140. If you're comparing a computer case where it can fit 220s versus 140, get 220s. If you're in a computer case where you can fit 240s or 320s, you're a little bit better off going with 320s than to get 240s. Mind, there are exceptions. We saw that in the testing in bigger cases. So it does depend on the quality of those 140 millimeter fans and how they are placed. If you're comparing 340s to 320s, get 340s. And if you're comparing like 280s versus 340s, that's kind of a mixed bag. And it really at that point I think is more up to you than the actual fans themselves for what kind of style you like. And if you're then bumping up to the next level, we're talking 200 millimeter class fans. Most cases aren't really designed for 200 millimeter fans. The brackets in the front to hold the fans in place are really designed more for 140s, so you're blocking off the fans. So at that point, I would actually go with 140s rather than the 200 millimeter class fans, unless you just like the style. Let's go on to the noise data. Cougar CF-V12 HP. Fractal X2-GP18. All right, now we're comparing the noise at every 10 PWM fan signal from as low as I could get them to go to as high as I could get them to go. And the noisiest is the Cougar CF-V12 right over here, but it starts to climb pretty well as you hit higher RPMs. The yellow is two CF-V12 HPs, and it is a relatively flat line, and it actually does cross past the one Cougar fan. So kind of just an interesting little result there. Next, we're going worst to best. We got the X2-GP18 single fan by itself, and it climb. At higher RPMs, it's actually doing pretty well. So this is airspeed actually on the right side, but you're hitting higher RPMs to get this higher airspeed, so it's staying right in this little group, which is good. We're gonna do the two X2-GP14s. It's sitting right here, actually pretty well at the top, and it sort of drops back, and it stays right there. It's looking pretty good overall. We have one A12X25 sitting down here, and then you hit a sweet spot, jumps up in airspeed, and stays right at the top. We have the two A12X25s as this white line. So at higher RPMs or higher airspeeds, it's a little bit noisier than the larger fans for equivalent airspeeds, or for the ones in this particular test. And then we have the 140 millimeter class fan right here, right in the middle of the pack, and then continues to climb up. But I want to repeat this. I'm not saying that one high quality fan beats like 120 millimeter class fan is going to beat out everything else in terms of total air cooling through your case, but it is up to you to determine how much you want to spend on this, which is actually going to be the next section, to get the level of cooling you want in your case. If you're on a budget and you need to cool your case, and most options, filling out the front of your case and making sure you got exhaust going is going to be better cooling for your components than just having one high quality fan. But the quality of the fan for blowing air through your case really does matter. It affects your total air speed, and adding those additional fans grants you much better performance without increasing your noise level substantially, which is what we're seeing right here. So in most cases, you're actually gaining a whole lot of performance without adding that much extra noise. So that's really the point of this test right here. Okay, now we have value proposition. This is a little bit different than how I normally do value proposition. I shrunk it down, and I didn't test every single, obviously in this test, I didn't test every single fan that I've tested. It was just going, hey, high quality 120 versus sort of a middle of the roads 140 versus sort of a middle of the roads 120 versus 180. That was what we were testing here. So now value. The value proposition is a very simple calculation. It is performance per dollar. So this is based off of standard pricing that I could find off of Amazon for all the products, and versus the airspeeds that I measured in my testing. So first we have the 6-inch mark. as the standard point. And let's go to one of the key fans in here, the X2-GP18. The X2-GP18 is a $40 fan. The A12X25 is a $32 fan. The X2GP14 is a $30 fan. The Cougar is, well, it's no longer being sold, but it was a $18 fan. So for the two together, just add to the cost of two fans together, and that becomes the value proposition for that group of fans. So I did include other fans that I felt were high quality that should be directly compared kind of in this category. So we got the P12 in here as crushing everybody else for value proposition. But okay, well, we're gonna focus in on what we are actually focusing on. So one X2GP14 compared to basically everything else is the best value proposition noise normalized. Next would be 180 millimeter class fan as pretty much the next best. I missed the Cougar one. So the one standard middle of the road, pretty much middle of the road, or two middle of the road 120 millimeter class fans are about the same value proposition as one, how much should I say it was? $40? So here, looking at the value, we can see that 220 millimeter middle of the road $18 fans beat out one $30 fan, 140 millimeter class one that's basically middle of the road for that category. So in terms of value, if you want the two fans, middle of the road, you're doing better off. The 180 millimeter class fan comes in next, and there aren't that many of them on the market. So its price, I guess, is kind of fine at $40. It's kind of expensive, but you know, its performance is kind of there even at the 6-inch mark. And then we do see that 240s, 220, the A12X25s are pretty low, relatively speaking, in terms of that value proposition for the 6-inch mark. Cranking things up to 100% PW fan signal, we see that the 140 is way up at the top. The 220s for this middle class fan really are relatively low in terms of that value proposition, where actually the 180 is better. And the 240s, 220s, the A12X25 and the X2GP14 are kind of on the low side for that value proposition. How about at the 11-inch mark, which is where we actually saw having more fans really making a huge difference in terms of that air speed going from the front of the case to the back of the case? Well, right away, we still see that one X2GP14 is way up there in terms of its value. It's not really way up there, but up there compared to these three. And the one X2GP18 is actually better value proposition than anything else there. But the two fans of everything else are actually worse value than having one X2GP18. So this is where it kind of gets interesting. I didn't do it with three fans. So two $40 fans versus needing three 18, what was it, 30, and yeah, but the rest are 30. I would say at that point you've actually transitioned back the other way, and it may be better value to get the three fans. But I didn't do the math, and I didn't do that test because my testing apparatus is only, well, it barely fit one or two 120s, and the 140 millimeter test, part of the fan was actually being blocked at the bottom of the case, so it wasn't even getting the full airspeed from that fan. So it was a little imperfect for this testing. But when we're looking at things at 100% PW fan signal, things are more or less holding their exact same position. So I guess we could say, before we get into talking it up, this is the raw data for each of the fans. So two Noctua A12X25s, two Cougars, the Fractal X2GP18, and 2 Fractal X2-GP18s. The other fans are up on my channel, or should be coming up on my channel, for their single raw data by themselves. So if you want to take a look at that. Where does that lead us with what I covered in this test, right? So the conclusion: if you have the option to fit a larger fan, more larger fans, do so. Placing them in the proper orientation, I was going to have to wait for another video, but they will greatly improve the air speed front to back. Going larger diameter is better than a smaller diameter. To an extent, I would say up to 180 millimeters, if your case can fit that size fan, would be optimal. If it cannot fit, go 140, because on average, it'll do a little bit better than an average 120. But if you insist on basically the best, going with a ultra high quality 120, and you do test data similar to mine to determine which fan gives you the best performance, can supply better performance from the front to the back of your case, as long as you have good exhaust to get the air back out of it. Otherwise, all of this is moot point. My case stimulation test is open back, so the air can flow freely through it. So again, you would need a good exhaust fan to make sure that air gets funneled out of the case. So that's really our conclusion here, is that both quality of the fan does matter, being additive together, which we saw from the test data, that just having more doesn't mean that it's always going to be better. Higher quality one is always going to outperform low quality ones in the same case, despite they filled the volume of the case with air. And we see that with both 120s and 140s, even compared directly with each other. But in general, a 140 will do better than a 120. And the main takeaway is to fill the volume if possible, and if you can afford it, go higher quality. If you don't want to do a full suite of 120 millimeter high quality fans, I would put the one high quality one in direct line of flow with your heat generating component that you potentially care most about, like your CPU air cooler, or in line with where your GPU is, to supply that component with as much high quality air as possible to get it driven to that location. Well, I guess that wraps up this video. If you have like questions or like other things you want me to talk about with regard to this video that I just couldn't think of while producing it, just write it down in the comments. I'm happy to answer it, because I needed to consolidate this as much as possible, and I think I rambled a lot, but I thought this testing was kind of interesting, and I'm going to be testing the Noctua 200 millimeter class fan in my testing apparatus, so I hope you're looking forward to that. It's going to use a lot of the data that we saw over here. If you've got constructive criticism for me on how I can improve my videos, please let me know. I want to make these videos more enjoyable for all of you to watch. I am a small channel, so I am limited on what I can do at this point, but I definitely will try to improve the ways that I can. If you wanted me to take a look at any specific fans in the future, please leave it in the comment section down below. For ease of my acquiring fans, please make it available on Amazon in the US. If you like what I'm doing, you want to see me get better testing equipment, which is actually one of the things I'm trying to build up for. So better anemometer, a little test chamber, better test chamber, a noise isolating chamber, all that kind of fun stuff. Please think about subscribing to my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Either way will really help me out, and I can't thank you enough. Or just hitting that subscribe button. That goes a long way to helping me with this channel. Anyways, thank you very much. Have a great day, and hope to see you next time on Computer Tech and More.